found in Islamic resources, or we derive them directly, and hence that creates additional scope for studies and debate. And finally, this approach or school of thought is focusing on developing the original models for testing the performance of moral economy. And with all this, these are the main features which we are trying to identify and create the new way of thinking and school of thought within the Islamic economics, which goes beyond just neoclassical understanding with some flavors or spices of Sharia. And with that, I invite Professor Asutay to give us his lecture.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. It is great to be here in this great city of Medina, Medina Munawwara, where the civilization of Islam, one way or another, started here. And therefore, it excites me. And I was hoping that we would have an enjoyable discussions in relation to what was the legacy of that civilization. And also it is important that the academic discipline that we are talking, Islamic economics in particular, again in 1976, the first conference in Mecca, the story of Mecca in the modern times. Historically, the practice, the emergence and the practice of Islamic economics here in this land, perhaps around us, and in modern times, the whole re-emergence as a discipline in Mecca in 1976, the first conference. So these are important landmarks for us to understand the whole idea of what I call Islamic moral economy, what is referred as Islamic economics, and how finance is part of that narrative. And therefore, it is essential for us to consider, the screen is not having the presentation, hopefully it will come up. Therefore, the importance of being here, but at the same time understanding those legacies, how those legacies are important in terms of informing us, but at the same time informing the future generation to constitute something different. And that different, of course, is very much located in the history, but importantly in the ontology, the Islamic norms, the Quran, and the tradition of our Prophet ﷺ. And hence the importance of being here excites me to talk here about Islamic moral economy and referring to sustainability. But at the same time, also I wish we had time in this very place of Medina to talk about the Medina market, established by Prophet ﷺ again, a unique model, a different model as an articulation of the Islamic worldview, Islamic morality, but Islamic practices. When we refer to market today, as we see quite a number of colleagues in academia, also in practice of Islamic economics and finance, they would refer to market as a system. So they would justify the existing system, the market economy. However, that model of market that was created by or established by Prophet ﷺ was unique. It wasn't a system. It was a unique place of getting together different stakeholders and ensuring justice prevails. And that justice, perhaps, is the essential core which distinguishes conventional economics and Islamic moral economy or Islamic economics. Because when we look at definitions, and the definition of economics as a neoclassical reality, would talk about the scarcity of resources, then endless needs, and then the optimization. So that's entirely an optimization problem. However, the Islamic economics, the iqtisad, no, it is ensuring justice is happening. So that's an amazing difference. And that difference is so uniquely important for us in responding to the contemporary problems that we are going through. And hence the whole sustainability debate. Everyone is talking about sustainability. Look, this is not a new story for us. The story, it goes back to that 1,400 years ago revelation of Quran, establishment of the Medina market, and etc. And however, we somehow remember sustainability because the global order tells us that sustainability is important. No, it is an embedded reality for us. So therefore, we have to look into how Medina is the starting point of this narrative in shaping the emergence of Islamic economy, if you call Islamic economy, but of course under the instructions from the Quran and the guidance from the Prophet ﷺ, how that civilization emerged. And therefore the Medina market, the market where justice essentialized, justice shaped the nature of it, but also embedded into the normative principles of Islam, as well as the teaching and the practice that was prevailing under the guidance of Prophet ﷺ. So therefore, it is important for us to look at and get inspiration from that historical reality in constituting the current, the contemporary, but also the future. So when we are talking about Islamic economics, rather than transplanting neoclassical economics through the Islamization process, it is important also to deconstruct the existing, to understand how and what it refers to, and therefore how authenticity, the sahih nature of knowledge, can be constituted so that we can develop practices around us. And that was very much the motivation, whether bankers and financiers like late Saleh Kamil or academics such as Khurshid Ahmed, Najatullah Siddiqui, Chopra, and others very much aimed at claiming that authenticity and suggesting that authenticity can help us today to constitute a new imaginary, a new way of establishing businesses and practices. But of course, that's the substance, the important part of substance. Today, of course, alhamdulillah, all over the world, Islamic finance is flourishing, but perhaps, therefore, we have to look into how we can ensure the stability of Islamic finance, not only because of financially they look stable, they are doing okay, but importantly creating this imaginary, giving confidence to every Muslims and everyone on the street, not only Muslims, but everyone, giving the confidence that there is a story here, and that story can help them with their well-being and well-being of the other stakeholders. And that is the objective that we have to look into. In order to reach such an objective, of course, you need to have your theoretical and philosophical foundations. And therefore, the importance of theory making, which can help us to shape the nature of the practices that we have, and hence the importance of those narratives. Of course, what happened, perhaps, even if we do not want to question those issues, sometimes external factors, such as COVID, has forced all of us to consider the new definitions or deconstruct the existing definition, such as what is human, what's the objective of human beings, and what's the objective in terms of economics, what's the objective function of humans. And COVID has demonstrated that to us, okay? So, such as the case, we all talk about individualism within neoclassical economics, and somehow we have adopted all that, but COVID has demonstrated that, look, yes, individualism perhaps important, but if I want to keep myself healthy, I have to ensure that you are healthy too. You have to be healthy as well. Because if you guys are not healthy, even if I try my best to be healthy, I can easily get COVID from you. And hence the importance of the community, bringing a new definition to human objective. What is that human objective? If it is maximizing, then I could say that, look, whatever happens to you guys, okay, as long as I am healthy. No. COVID shown that, no, I cannot keep myself healthy unless you are healthy as well. So those definitions, unfortunately, when such incidents happens, everyone become very reflective, but when the incident disappears, everyone forgets that. No, these are important criteria for us to consider and to reflect on it, and hence looking into how different ways of organization can be possible around us. Okay, so therefore, looking into alternative ways of reorganizing societies, alternative ways of reorganizing economy and society, the finance has become an important factor for everyone, but importantly also to Muslim societies to consider. And therefore, reflecting on those issues, going beyond the existing words, but looking at the meanings, the concepts, and etc. I wish I had time to play this part of this movie. This is this movie about the life of Malcolm X, the Muslim leader in 1960s in the United States. When he was in prison, there were some Muslims in the prison as well. They approached him because this was a very clever guy, but he wasn't on the right path. So they approached him to show that the meanings construct and the words construct new meanings. So they showed him the dictionary. They opened. They said, look at white here, the definition of white. Everything, anything in life that is beautiful is attached to the word white. But anything and everything that is bad, negative, is attached to black. So the definition, okay, how the definitions are important for us to consider. And therefore, if they impose you this particular definition of being bad, anything that is bad in life is black, by definition, then sociologically, psychologically, that happens. And this has been happening in the Muslim world as well, unfortunately. We have been told that we are underdeveloped. We were told that, look, we cannot progress. And all that. And they told us that, look, if we give you this program, that program, you will develop. And Muslim world has been particularly stigmatized. But on the other hand, we have this amazing narrative that I started with. And I love in Indonesia, if you've been to Indonesia, in any Islamic economics and finance conference, they will say that Islamic economics, Rahmatul Alameen. Indeed. So that story of Rahmatul Alameen is an important social capital for us to look into how we can constitute something new. And therefore, our practices, one another, has to refer to those new meanings we have to bring up. That was the generation like 40 years ago, 50 years ago. In the contemporary times, they wanted to bring that. And therefore, the confusion that we see around us, everyone refers to nowadays sustainability. Somehow the new terms have emerged in recent times. On the one hand, the objective of business, what is business? We were told, and we are teaching in our schools even now, that individual is self-maximizer. The objective of businesses is maximize because the shareholder value maximization is important. We are all rational and all that. And then suddenly COVID happens and ask all those questions. Do you think so? Yes, we have seen that. But with that, of course, when you had Friedman, for instance, coming up in 1960s, suggesting that the only social responsibility businesses have is maximizing profit. And then slowly changing attitudes in such matters, corporate social responsibility emerged. But then what happened? The world realized that, look, we are oppressing nature heavily. Nature is not giving back anymore. The climate is getting a revenge. Environment is getting revenge. The humans are getting revenge because what we call in Islam the mizan, the balance has been shaken. The balance, because when you oppress too much environment, we were told with the rationalism idea, the more you push, the more you oppress, the more efficiency you will get. Well, now it says that, look, forget efficiency, you are doomed because climate is a problem, environment is a problem, you are not going to be able to live even, okay? So these are the realities. And therefore the global order tells us that the importance of ESGs, the importance of SDGs as the new global morality to us. And then, of course, the green financing, the impact financing, responsible investing, social impact investing, and all those terminologies have emerged. But suddenly then you realize all those terminologies referred by the same financial companies who have brought all these catastrophes on us. Then how come they have become such good people that they converted immediately, they wanted something good? No, because the issue is that, no, they do not have such intentions. Why? Because they think that this is new opportunity space for them. They will make more money by talking about green. They will make more money because they will say that it is ESG, because etc., etc. So I was in a meeting here in the United Kingdom, in the Parliament Select Committee. The minister was there, and they brought one of the top bank, global top bank, the person who is in charge of their sustainability. And she gave this amazing story of how this bank is wonderful in terms of sustainability. Then you ask a question, look, I know your operations, what you are doing here, it doesn't fit into that. Then they don't bother even to respond to you, because this is the new way of, again, rationalism and making money out of that. And therefore, looking into why I call that a confusion, perhaps intentional confusion, so that they can create additional. Why it is not necessarily substantial for us, because even the most moralist is talking about sustainability, but the most radical capitalist is talking about sustainability. So then you start to question, why is that? Why one has suddenly become a very much obsessed with sustainability? Because what? This amazing news story, sustainability, which is a reality, by the way, it doesn't, within the new articulation, the new language, and the new paradigm, unfortunately, it doesn't question what I call the initial equation. What is that initial equation? Those of you who have done economics, you have done production function. What is production function? You will say Y is a function of K and L. So sustainability doesn't change that. Still the capital is dominant. Labor, even in that production function, is expressed in terms of capital. So you do not have other stakeholders. Everyone talks about climate. Everyone talks about environment, but unfortunately in the equation, Y is equal to K and L, or the function of K and L, you don't have environment, you do not have climate, and as mentioned, human relegated to labor, and that is expressed in terms of capital as well. So if your initial equation does not have other stakeholders, then how we are going to solve the problem by claiming that it is sustainability, it is green, and it is impact investing? No, it is not going to solve the problem, but it is going to defer the problem. While the deference of the problem happens, the financial companies will make, again, money on the misery of environment and on the misery of climate issues. So these are the problems for us. And therefore, whatever we have around us, the institutional logic that we call, the institutional logic of market system cornered all of us, okay? And within that, it defines everything, including the legal systems, and everything is defined according to gain of the capital. Gain of capital is the only determining factor, the institutional logic, the market logic. And therefore, it does not, the new discourses such as sustainability does not go beyond this initial definition to say that, look guys, there is something wrong in this production function, for instance. In this initial equation, there is something wrong because the stakeholders are not here. So if stakeholders are not here, how we are going to solve the problem? You are not going to be able to. I'm not a good mathematician, but you won't be able to solve it if the variable is not included in the equation itself. So that's the reality that we have. And therefore, it is very much important for us to look at this story that I mentioned, the narrative, the Islamic narrative, the Rahmatul Alamin, part of this narrative, how it is essential for us to consider, because we can suggest substantive solutions, not only for the Muslim world, but to the rest of the world. And these are important. They told the Muslim world that the Muslim world is underdeveloped because Islam doesn't allow. And today, and these are the qualities. Why? Because Islam had that qualities, considering environment as an amana, and therefore you couldn't oppress environment. And however, they rejected all this, and they created all this capitalism as a development. And now today, we used to teach in economic development classes which country is most developed, the country which consumes most electricity, the country which consumes the most oil. But now, with the sustainability, the countries which are consuming less electricity, they are considered to be more sustainable. You see how the story has changed, but the essence didn't change. And therefore, it is important for us to look into what is the Islamic logic. And by using the Islamic logic, how we can constitute a particular economic understanding, and through which, therefore, we can shape our societies, we can shape our institutions. Islamization has limited success so far. But we want to go beyond that, rather than limiting ourselves with the Islamization, getting the neoclassical concepts of economics without questioning them and Islamizing that, in particular using fiqh so far. Okay, it enabled our Islamic banks to operate, but unfortunately it hasn't created that system understanding, and hence the importance. And the reality is, when you look at the financial sector is the dominant one. It is no longer even economy. Financial sector is supposed to be a service sector, helping the economy to run. It is supposed to be just the oil in the system so that the system can run. But it's a sector. It is beyond the economic. Now, compared to the GDPs of each country, the financial sectors and the financial assets much, much larger than what we have. So, and the crisis that leads. I mean, when you look at in 2021 figures, the world GDP is only 8.3% of the total assets. It is not the other way around. Because in a normal, healthy economy, you would expect financial services be a small part of your GDP, gross domestic product. But now, the equation has entirely changed. The financial sectors, much, much, much larger than we can imagine. But there is no assets. So if there is no asset, there is no link with the real economy. So that creates the tension that we have around us. When you look at the figures, you see how difficulty that we are in, which by allowing the financial sector to be dominant in the process. Okay, all this, the global GDP, for instance, and looking at the financial sector, but also looking at the Muslim world. Okay, and asking people. This is a survey published in 2021 by the UNDP, United Nations Development Program. Despite the COVID environment, and they surveyed very large number of people, and in 50-odd number of countries, despite the COVID conditions, 64% of the respondents suggested that what we have is climate. Climate is an emergency problem, and hence the importance. But also the whole development idea. A survey looked at in different countries how people treat the foreigners. Okay, you are walking on the street and you are asking people information. Where is masjid? Okay, where is mosque? Where is cathedral? And etc. Look at the results. The most developed countries, the human, where is the human? The most so-called developed countries, they score the least. Okay, the human connectedness disappeared in this what called development. And look at top, where the foreigners treated best. Nigeria, Cameroon, Iraq, Georgia, Zambia, Kenya. So these are important factors for us in terms of essentializing human in our understanding. And look at, again, okay, the relationship with environment. Look at the imprint created by birds with the nature, how they are in harmony with nature. Look at turtles, again, how they are in harmony with nature. And look at humans. Look at the rubbish that we leave, damage we leave. Why? Because with the expansion of financial sectors, with the credit cards in our pockets, every one of us wants to create an Instagram photograph by polluting the environment, by consuming a lot and a lot. And why? Because we have access to finance. But the accessibility to finance was supposed to help us to empower ourselves. And in empowering ourselves, we were supposed to be in harmony with the rest. No, the dominance, the consumption. And that consumption is very much important for the system to continue. And hence, therefore, the whole idea that we have to run. Because growth is important. Yes, growth is important. But if the growth is not harmony with other stakeholders, it's not that growth. That's linear growth. And that linear growth, unfortunately, brought us what we have today. Climate problem, environment problem, and human insecurity problem. Okay? And this is very false. Those of you familiar in the UK, you have this dog races. So on the rails, they will put a mechanic rabbit. And poor dogs, thinking that these are real rabbits, they will run after. Okay, that's the motivation. And that is the story what we have in reality as humans as well. We are given this imaginary growths. And unfortunately, in the end, you don't get anything. Because that rabbit is not a real rabbit. Okay? And this is our stories, unfortunately. And that is what Islam challenged. And therefore, it is important. And how corporations, therefore, have become dominance. We are, in the West, we are going through this amazing energy crisis. The ordinary households, their bills have increased 3-folds, 4-folds, and 5-folds. But what happens? British Gas, $10 billion profit. By whom? By exploiting people again, in the same way. But remember the prophetic tradition. You cannot commodify, you cannot sell through things. The fire, nowadays is the oil. Yep, the fire, the air, and the green. These are water and the green. So these three things cannot be commodified. But that's happening, and therefore the problems, as long as corporations are gaining. And therefore the importance of defining what is capital. Because if we are to regenerate the story of Medina and Mecca, in order to understand those philosophical understanding and normativeness, we have to define what capital is. And that is the important starting point. And when it comes to theoretical definitions, unfortunately, we have not considered that. And we have taken the existing institutional forms of banks. We didn't question the production function, but we just Islamized it. And the result, therefore, is important for us to define. What we have, that's the story, capitalism. The dominance, capital is dominant. The only way you could reach to a result, justice. That was the definition of Medina market, ensuring justice takes place, okay? And through that, because you would give accessibility to those people who do not have accessibility, okay? And the reality even is much better and much worse, because most of us in negative, and therefore the importance of equity. But equity is a solution, but still you are not getting out of the issue because accessibility. And that's the message of Islam. Allah created all those resources for everyone to have accessibility. And that's the Islam's core fundamental principle, okay? And therefore there is a need to change so that we can enable people to have access. Of course, zakat is an amazing source to enable people to have access. Of course, waqf is an amazing institution to enable people to have access. But before going into zakat and waqf, how we can reconstitute the economy and therefore how people can have access. That accessibility in the right-hand side, certain accessibility at least given because barrier has been removed, people have access. Justice, the definition of Islam again, what economics is. But the real justice will be like the Medinan market, that liberation of empowering individual, emancipation and empowering. Remember that is terribly discouraged in Islam. Why? Because it creates dependence. However, Islam is related with liberation. How individuals can be empowered and how individuals can be emancipated from debt. Creating the indebted man and woman has been the story of capitalism, and that has to be overcome in the process. So these are therefore important issues for us. And in this photograph is an interesting story there is behind that. In a protest against what's happening in the world, there was a protest. And this white American woman having this card in her hand saying that let's bank the Muslim way. So there's a story there. She thinks that there's an amazing story in the Muslim way that we bank, because by doing that we could overcome the financial crisis, economic crisis, the environmental crisis, and etc. That is her expectation. So therefore the Rahmatul Alameen, how we can ensure that narrative of Islam in terms of moral economy can deliver for Muslims as well as non-Muslims. But in order to do that, we have to understand what is that Muslim way. And that requires, therefore, overcoming domination by considering all the stakeholders in the equation so that the solution can be found, the alternative ways. And therefore, what is the objective of finance? And that's an important question if finance is dominating as such. And I'm not saying that. Schiller, one of the Nobel Prize winners, look at his definition. What is finance? As finance is not a zero-sum game, he would say. In other words, you cannot just financialize the world. Finance has to be linked to society's objectives. If finance is not serving the society's objective, then that's not acceptable, he says. You know, in his book, if you look at The Good Society, that is the story that he has. So the goals and ideals of a society should determine the function of finance, not the finance determining the goals and the ideals of a society. So therefore, that's important. And therefore, when you look at that photograph that I have at the top, the writing, I was passing through Brussels, and I saw one financial institution had on their building huge writing. The art of protecting and financing people. That is what Rahmatul Alamin, the finance, how we can use finance to protect people, and not only people, because Islam says that you have to protect all the other stakeholders, environment, climate, land, and etc., to ensure that we are in harmony. So that's the story that we have to look in to understand, to search for answers. But when we look at those answers, of course, as I mentioned in the beginning, the words have meanings, and a lot of impositions on the Muslim societies, or Islam in particular, over the last 100 years. The imposition is particularly important for us because we were told who we are by the external forces, but also what we are capable of. No. We have to realize what we are capable of. What is our narrative? And from that narrative, what we can generate, rather than just following what Weber said. Weber said that Muslims, no, they cannot achieve development. Rodinson said, no, the best capitalists are the Muslims. No, these are the definitions by others. We have to look at our own definitions rather than allowing us to be squeezed between these positions and to say something new. That something new is an important part of the new narrative that we have to come. In other words, how we can establish a society of equilibrium, as Islam refers to ihsan. And in the morning session, there were a lot of references to ihsan and morality, and therefore how ihsan can be an important part of that narrative, shaping the governance of accessibility to resources. How we can generate a new theory, new practice, that the accessibility to resources is constituted around ihsan, for instance. Okay, so that the whole rahmatul alamin, blessing to humanity and the world, can be achieved, and also emancipation and empowerment can take place. So therefore, these are important reflections for us to look at. When we look at emergence of economics, finance, whatever, everything starts with a particular ontology. In our case, the Quran. And then it's the worldview. What is Islam's worldview? What is modernist worldview? And what is Islamic worldview? And that will have important consequences for us. Because the norms that we derive from Islam, or norms that they have taken from the Enlightenment, the Western philosophy, has different meanings, different ways of organizing the social formation society. It is not the underdevelopment. It is the internalization and integrating the ideals, the norms in constituting a particular social formation. And with that, you generate a particular system. Because social formation is how you can create a system through which you arrange accessibility to resources. You do the definitions. What is capital, what is land, what is labor, and etc. And through which you create a particular social formation, how we have accessibilities. And therefore, the governance of accessibilities. And therefore, you create a system, Islamic economic system, or capitalist system, or whatever it is. Okay? In our case, the Islamic economic system. Sorry, somehow. Okay, then of course the whole Islamic economics and the Islamic order emerging from that, or capitalist order in the case of capitalism, because then you would define what are the resources we have, who have access to resources, why and how. In other words, how you bring land, labor, capital, environment, and etc., so that you can generate a particular production function. In Islam's case, this includes all the stakeholders. However, capitalism, only capital. So therefore, sustainability, if it is only determined by capital, how you are going to achieve capital sustainability if you do not have in the initial equation the interests of other stakeholders. And therefore, that will give us a particular system understanding, whether historically you had all this Islam, but others, Confucianism, for instance, Christians, Judaism, they had a particular way of organizing the society, because you have all these definitions. In other words, what is labor? What is capital? What is labor? What is the relationship? What is the relationship to accessibilities and etc.? And that will bring us a new way of looking at the reality. And that has been historically the case. You had all these different ways of organizing society. However, with the emergence of modernity, the so-called the end of history logic, and all those different ways of organizing organizing societies have been swept out. The only way, there's only one, that is capitalism. So you had all those different narratives, different stories, different parts of the world, different systems of organizing societies, but that disappeared. So therefore, looking at the sustainability debate and the difficulties we are going through, referring to the original, the sahih, the authentic, how we can use the authentic to bring back. In other words, they told us that everyone is rational, everyone's self-interested, everyone maximizes. That's the story of neoclassical economics. And then you come to, for instance, to this country, how this country has been generous, contributing to nearly in all the Muslim countries, whether it is construction from a mosque, whether it's a scholarship, an amazing story. So if they are rational, how come rather than maximizing their pockets, they are distributing? There must be a difference here. And that's the important part of the questioning that we have to bring to the table, that there are different value systems. And those value systems, therefore, neoclassics telling us that there is no other story, but there is one particular story, is not correct. And therefore, the emergence of Islamic economics and finance is an important story for us, because what it said, look, neoclassical model, what it did, development failures, poverty, sustainability, environmental crisis, financial and economic crisis is going around us. However, we have to come up with the ethical production and the consumption, how that can happen. And therefore, searching for alternatives, how those alternatives can be possible. This is again, and therefore, looking into those issues, 1950s, looking at how theoretical responses emerged, but in addition to different theoretical emergences, Islamic economics therefore came up, suggesting that all those different ways. Look, every region, every country, every tradition have different institutions. They have different values. They have different cultures, religion, and norms. These are important factors rather than just defining human as self-maximizing. And therefore, the whole debate under development is not value-free. In other words, neoclassical economics told us that everything is value-free, but it is not value-free. In other words, all those factors mentioned has impact on our decision-making, in our behavior, because what? The assumed premises are different. So I would say that Islam and Islamic norms determine, but some other person might say that their own culture determines, rather than just one neoclassical determination. Philosophical methods are different. Islam understands in a different way. Visions are different, and therefore, by definition, economics and finance is socially constructed, and hence Islam has a particular way of constructing that with the Islamic value system. And therefore, the importance of moral economy is hugely important for us to look at the moral economy. Moral economy is not a new concept. Historically was there. In other words, how the societies were shaped through the morality of a particular society. In other words, how ethics, the normativeness of a part, in our case, Islamic normativeness, Islamic ethicality, but in other cases, different ethical sources have shaped the nature and the operation of society. How, therefore, ethics determine the economics and the economic relations, okay? And importantly, the individual characteristics, the individual characters, the behavioral norm, how it is determined by morality, in our case, by Islam, for instance. And therefore, it is very much bringing back those values, creating a particular story out of that, and understanding how finance, economics, social and political environment comes together to constitute a particular governance. How we have accessibility to resources, how we can organize that. Therefore, in our case, Islamic moral economy talks about the whole ihsan, and through ihsan, how ihsanic governance can be constituted so that the accessibility to resources can be possible, and when that accessibility fails, how zakat and waqf can play an important role in the process. Okay, I'm having problem with this one, but hopefully, and therefore, moral economy suggests that the embeddedness, in other words, economic and the financial relations, economic and the financial decision making is embedded in the value system of a particular society. And therefore, the importance of community, the importance of reciprocity, the importance of coordination in the society so that accessibility can be possible, but importantly, no commodification and no fictitiousness. In other words, you cannot commodify water. You cannot put in the markets, commodity markets, and sell water like the hedge funds are doing today. You cannot commodify certain resources in the economy because everyone has to have access. And everything is not. And therefore, the term here, it is not the prices that determine everything as the neoclassical economics tells us. No, it is everything, the value system, that determines prices. And that was the story of the Medinan market, for instance. Okay? And hence, the importance and referring to that. But the neoclassical economics would tell us that everyone knows prices, but no one knows the values. And hence, that's against that reality. No. What we are suggesting that everything, the normative worldview determines the prices. Therefore, it would suggest that it is the values, it is the norms, it is the cognitive repertoire in a particular society will determine the institutions and the theories. So therefore, Medina market was created. Why? Because you had the revelation. You had the Prophet ﷺ as the guide. So the value system, the norms, the cognitive repertoire. Yes, Quran doesn't mention about musharaka and mudaraba, but it was in that society, and that society considered, the Prophet ﷺ considered that it acceptable within the Islamic norms and values. Therefore, musharaka and mudaraba is an Islamic product. And therefore, those definitions are important in understanding. Okay, I'm just going to rush through. And therefore, the whole ontology, the justice, the just part, in other words, adala, has to be the essential part of an economic system understanding that we have. And with ihsan, you have to establish that balance in the economy. Okay, ihsan plays an equilibrium role in the economy so that we can provide accessibilities. And therefore, as a result of that, by definition, is not an external factor. It tells you that you have to be sustainable. By definition, your economy is sustainable. Why? Because through that justice understanding, you recognize the interests of all the stakeholders in the process. Okay? And therefore, as a result of that, what happens? Sustainability is achieved. In your initial equation, you have all the stakeholders in the process. And what is imperative to achieve this? And when there is a failure, therefore the whole Islah process, going back and questioning those institutional forms, how we can solve the problem in the process. So therefore, such as the question to understand those distinctions, why Islamic is different. The question sounds very silly, as you can see on the screen. Because if I go to the elementary school, of course, they will say that this guy is a professor, but he's a silly guy. He doesn't understand that. But that's an essential question for us. Whether 5 is superior to 4, whether 4 is superior to 5, whether 4 is equal to 5. By definition, we know, of course, 5 is superior. We have been told. But that's the distinction. That's because it has removed the value system. It tells you only as objective figures, okay, in absolute terms, 5 or 4. So when you look at it as an absolute terms, of course, 5. But when you bring the values now, okay, in our case, if I tell you that you have 2 options. One investment brings you 5, but that 5 has riba in it. And then the second option is an investment portfolio which brings you 4, but is halal. Now for you, because of the value system, now 4 is superior for you than 5. Because it includes haram. 5 includes haram. Therefore 4 is bigger for you. However, sometimes 5 can be equal to 4 because of the particular, again, portfolio optimization. Or sometimes 5 indeed doesn't have haram, and therefore it is higher than 4. In other words, the values. And therefore the sustainability problem within this moral economy, you overcome the sustainability problem in the process. Again, the question, whatever we have around us, whether it is a right or privilege, the contemporary economic system, capitalism, based on neoclassicism, legal system that we have around us, the governance system that we have around us will tell you that whatever you have, it is your right. But then, because it's based on the definition of human, the maximizing and rational human, but if it is my right, therefore I can oppress you, I can oppress environment, I can do all those things. Is that acceptable? No. Because Islam suggests that whatever you have around you is a privilege. It is given to you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? So if it's a privilege, it's an amana. So you have to take care of all these stakeholders around you. People working for you, environment, climate, and etc. Again, as you can see, it is in the initial equation. It's not an external for us. And therefore, again, importance of understanding through the Islamic normativeness. Because that is very much in the definition of the word iqtisad as opposed to economics. We can translate iqtisad into economics, of course. Most of you speak Arabic much better than I can handle. But when we look at the term, therefore, iqtisad, directly because the Islamic worldview, it relates to justice. It relates to justice. It relates to just share, justice towards a particular objective, true path, and equable. In other words, establishing justice to locate everything in its place, environment in its place, climate, human, and everything has to be in its place so that justice can be achieved. And therefore, a stakeholder-centered understanding is very much important. And therefore, when we look at all the definitions provided since 1960s, the definition either tells us establishing justice, what is Islamic economics, establishing justice, or preventing injustice in the society. It is not an optimization between scarce resources, scarcity, and the endless demand. No, it is justice. So from the beginning, and therefore my initial opening, the words have meaning. Okay, so when you have a word iqtisad as your definition and as your starting point, your definition is entirely different. And therefore, within that understanding, the mizan, therefore establishing that equilibrium between different stakeholders, that one cannot be dominant over other. Because I'm a human being, therefore I can oppress the other human beings. I can oppress the nature. I can oppress the environment. No. The balance has to be the essential part that we have to protect and continue. And therefore, the importance of establishing that justice, because you have the mizan, the balance, as the important part of the Islamic economic system. It's very slowly, but I'm coming. Okay, just bear with me. So I'll just pass it. Somehow it's very slow. So therefore, important fact is one, human beings, a falah objective function, okay? Individuals. So your objective function, neoclassical economics tells you that you have to maximize your consumption in relation to an budget constraint. Here what it tells you that, look, your falah, in this world and hereafter, it relates how much you relate to other people. how you respond to other people. Okay? Yes, your consumption has to be halal, but beyond that, what is important, how much you can do to the others and the society in relation to what you have. And because ihsan tells you that, you have to achieve that. So therefore, the equation changes. Your consumption function, your objective function, individual objective function that you maximize has entirely changed now. You have falah. It tells you that hereafter is part of the equation as well. The neoclassical economics, of course, will not consider that. But in your equation function, you have others, society, and the hereafter. It's an entirely different paradigm now. Why? Because justice and mizan are the important part of the narrative here. Sorry. And therefore, when we look at the Islamic moral economy, it's entirely an alternative ways of redefining things. And through the Islamic value system, how we can come up with certain system understanding. Because at the core of this comes Tawheed. So the meaning of Tawheed, of course, the oneness of Allah. But what's the meaning of that is important. The meaning is that all the stakeholders have to be in balance in the society so that the unity can be achieved. In other words, the complementarity. It's all the stakeholders complement each other, and by complementing each other, we will achieve the unity that we have. And therefore, the importance of Allah as a consequence of that. The stakeholders have to be treated accordingly, because you have the Tawheed suggests that we are all complementing each other. I'm complementing you, you complementing the next person, we complement society, we all complement environment and etc. So that and we have to do that according to justice. And as a result of that, my growth, rather than that rabbit example I have given you, my growth has to be in line with your growth. My growth has to be in line with the other stakeholders. Why? Tazkiyah, the harmony. The harmony between different stakeholders are important. Why? Because Rububiyyah suggests that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created everyone and everything with a particular development path towards perfection. And that perfection directly identifies my objective function. So therefore, I have to work towards, put the efforts for perfection, but I have to give the opportunity space to everyone and all the stakeholders to reach to that perfection. And why? Because everything that we have around us is given us as amana. So we have to respect and ensure that their development path can be achieved as well. And why? Because some of those are voluntary, but others are fard. For instance, zakat is a fard. Why? We have to compensate the society who have not had the accessibility that we talked, and therefore zakat has to be given, and it's a fard. Some others are not necessarily fard. And why? Because we have the responsibility. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the responsibility to deliver that so that we can achieve solidarity, not only between people, but with all the stakeholders that we have around us. And therefore, the maqasid al-Sharia is important for us. Everyone refers to the Sharia nowadays. What I call it, like the greenwashing that we have with sustainability, it seems that maqasid has become part of that process, what I call the maqasid washing. No, maqasid is an amazing methodological framework for us to utilize, to essentialize, so that the accessibility to resources with the stakeholding, extended stakeholding understanding, according to ihsan, can be achieved. But rather than using maqasid, just justifying the processes, is not something that we would consider as a methodological framework. Okay, therefore, I'm going to pass this part. I have been talking a lot. So the whole contribution of maqasid al-Sharia, by looking at identifying all the stakeholders and their development path, so that we can constitute a particular Islamic moral economic framework, essentializing the well-being of all the stakeholders is important. And therefore, the story of 1970 is. So how we can create this new paradigm through which we can empower individuals, the human beings, but other stakeholders at the same time, so that the Rahmatul Alameen can be achieved. And that's a narrative that we have to put effort, whether academics, bankers and financiers, but other stakeholders in the society, we have to come together to essentialize that we can achieve this narrative. Just a few slides, then I will finish. Yep. Hopefully, if this works. But importantly, of course, this development is not only talking about just the growth, as we mentioned. It is much larger than that. It is a particular understanding with the moral filter of Islam. How moral filter, therefore, through avoiding riba, and riba is very much important. Why? It is not only with the prohibition of riba we can sell from A to B a halal way. No. We are at the same time defining what capital is. And therefore is an amazing story. My colleagues here who are specialized in fiqh, they have to forgive me, but this treatment of riba, only a transactional form, the prohibition of riba, just a transactional form, unfortunately, is a relegation of this amazing story, just a technical term. No, it is an amazing narrative in terms of defining what capital is. What's the role of capital? And therefore, we have to really look into riba in extensively as a political economy tool, as a moral economy tool, rather than just a transactional tool. And therefore, how we can bring the Islamic moral values to shape even the way we understand what riba is, or what the prohibition of riba, what's the hikmah in that, rather than just a transaction. And therefore, the importance of, rather than looking at A is selling to B is halal, we finish that. No. What's the substance there? What was the objective? What's the substance? What we want to achieve? And what consequences that we have produced? We might give a project, and unfortunately we have empirically proved that in our paper, that you give financing to a project, but that project has negative consequences. So negative consequences to environment, negative consequences to other stakeholders. Now, how you are going to deal? The transaction seems to be halal, but the substance is not. Okay? So therefore, we cannot divorce the form from the substance, because tawheed, the whole Islamic idea, okay, suggests that you cannot have this one-sided biased analysis. You have to complement them. The complementarity is essential for us. So riba is haram, yes, but in addition to that, harming environment is haram. Harming other individuals is haram. Harming climate is haram as well. So therefore, these are the Islamic moralities. Fiqh, therefore, has to consider those moralities in the decision-making processes. And that is important, essentially important for us to consider. And therefore, looking at the moral purpose in life is an essential quality, so that we can respond to the needs of all these different stakeholders, while, of course, we are not saying that wealth cannot be created. Indeed, Islam doesn't have any problem with that. But how wealth in relation to other stakeholders can be generated, can be created, that's the narrative that we have to look into, and importantly, develop an understanding and theoretical understanding how that can be achieved. It's the same thing. It is not properly working. Perhaps it's tired. So we are oppressing the remote control, unfortunately, and tired. So therefore, we have to overcome by respecting to all the stakeholders in the process. By respecting all the stakeholders, we can overcome the oppressive exploitation, whether it is human, whether it is environment, whether it is climate, and establish that society of ihsan in the process. And these are important factors for us to consider. There are, I think, 2-3 slides that I want to show, but I will pass if this works. Okay. I just want to pass this, but it's not fast enough. So therefore, Islamic moral economy within the theoretical understanding, one, of course, the essentialization of justice, but also importantly, the social change. How the social change is an important factor. It is how importantly shaped Islamic moral economy has implications for social change. The social formation of society, accessibility to resources through Islamic governance. And therefore, yes, private property, but the amana part is important, establishing that harmony between different stakeholders. Yes, market, but what is not a market system that capitalism imposes on us, that you are as rational individual you can maximize. No, it's a marketplace as it was in Medina, where all the stakeholders' interests are considered in the process. And therefore, it is a different logic, is a different system, and that different system is the Rahmatul Alamin, hopefully, if we can work towards that objective. Of course, the objective is having this progressive understanding of change can be created so that elimination of poverty, the social justice, the reduction of economic disparities, the interest-free system, institutionalization of zakah, and importantly, sustainable development by looking into the interests of all stakeholders can be achieved. And therefore, is embeddedness. In other words, the value system, it is not the prices that determines everything. It is everything that is Islam, the value system, that determines the price. And that is very much the story of Islam that I'm proposing here as part of the Islamic moral economy. If you could press from there, perhaps we can save time. If you could control from there, please. Because this is not working. Yes. Yes, I'm finishing. Okay. Hopefully, in other words, therefore, this embeddedness part is very much important with an additional quality, this inherent value. In addition to others, the inherent value would tell us that by definition of creation, whether you are a human, whether you are environment, climate, you have a right. Okay? That privileged part plays an important role. So it is because of being created. You have a right to what available around us, and therefore everything has to be controlled within that. And therefore this amazing definition, I'm saying amazing because not me, but I brought together all this moral economy to provide this definition, the Sibafi Guide for Sustainability. It is available online. I would suggest you to read, in particular the theoretical part I try to articulate by bringing all these definitions together, and in the end suggesting that the Islamic governance, how we can establish this equilibrium in the society by respecting all the stakeholders and their interests is important for us to consider. And therefore, a particular economic understanding where the balance is essential mizan, justice is the objective, and through establishing equilibrium in the society. These are the pillars of the Islamic economic system or Islamic moral economy. Riba is prohibited so that capital should not have domination over the other stakeholders, so that you have the mizan or the equilibrium in the society. The same way, just in the opposite, zakat. What's the objective of zakat again? When people are excluded from accessing to resources, that's the way you compensate people. Just finish with this particular equation so that it can be explained what it is. So in the capitalist production function, you have K and L. Okay, those of you who have done economics. And you have technology given, productivity. And therefore, you cannot see all the other stakeholders while we are talking about sustainability. They are not in the equation even. But when you look at the Islamic production function, you have one, you cannot relegate humans to labor. It is the human effort. It is the land and environment. It is the society and other stakeholders depending on the social formation of the society. And we even would consider capital there. And what is important also, unlike the capitalist or the neoclassical production function, that everything determined by capital, and therefore labor will get what is determined by capital. Here in the equation, each of the factors of production, each of the stakeholders will go to the equation independently with this superscripts, alpha, beta, lambda, and etc., rather than everything is determined by capitalism. Not only that, as you can see in front of each stakeholders, you have A, B, C, D, and E. What it means, if within the production function, the stakeholders do not get enough to be able to live, to able to prosper according to the rububiyya, the perfection, then they have a right from the Baitul Mal so that the equilibrium can be established in the society. So as you can see, it is not only a verbal expression of issues, but it is particularly a theoretical formulation of what can be. And therefore, individual objective function falah, yes, individual consumption, but falah of others, the consumption and the well-being of others and other stakeholders, and hereafter has to be taken into equation. In other words, yes, the individual relations with society, and the hereafter has to be taken into account, constituting a particular understanding. I'll finish with that, Ali. I'm not going to go to other parts because I know everyone is just the last slide, and therefore, and hence therefore here, okay, this is typical how Islamic finance would work. You have the Sharia filter, you had the prohibition, but what is missing, that the green area, the morality. So the riba is haram, of course, the garar is, and etc. But by applying those rules, you are financing a project which creates harm to the rest of the stakeholders. And therefore, that has to be considered in the equation so that you can establish that society of equals, the equilibrium society, the ihsani society. And therefore, suggesting that the Islamic logic is larger than the fiqh logic. So fiqh would consider riba, prohibition, garar, maisir, sin industries, and that. But of course, the Islamic logic is larger than by considering the maqasid al-sharia consequences. And therefore, bringing the substantive morality, the opportunity space for other stakeholders to flourish. And that has to be considered in the equation, and then we would call that an Islamic logic. And that Islamic logic is something that we have to put our efforts together to hopefully constitute so that it can be a rahmatul alamin, and it can be a rescue process, rescuing land, humans, climate, and environment. But we have to put our efforts towards that end. As long as we put the efforts in salat tawfiq, success will be from Allah. Thank you very much, and I'm so sorry for taking your time.